Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the fascinating world of medieval knights and how they prepared for battle. Imagine the clink of metal against metal, the sharp scent of sweat and leather, and the hustle of armor being adjusted as the sun rises over the horizon. You probably won't survive this, just kidding. But seriously, the preparations medieval knights went through to get ready for battle were as intense as the fights themselves. From donning layers of armor to choosing the right weapons, every step was crucial. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, feel free to post where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm curious to know how far we've traveled tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. First, let's talk about what happens when a knight prepares to go into battle. It's not as simple as just grabbing a sword and riding out into the field. No, the process is much more detailed. To begin with, the knight's armor was not only essential for protection, but also a statement of his status and wealth. The armor weighed around 45 to 55 pounds on average, covering the knight from head to toe, including the legs, arms, chest, and back. That's right, your average knight would wear a full body suit of metal designed to absorb strikes from swords and arrows. Imagine trying to walk in that. You'd probably feel like a clunky robot, but knights had to master the art of moving swiftly in this heavy gear. Each piece of armor had a specific purpose. The breastplate protected the knight's vital organs, while the greaves shielded the legs and the gauntlets covered the hands. But before all this armor could be donned, the knight had to prepare the base layer, a padded garment often made from linen or wool, which helped cushion the body and prevent chafing. This wasn't just for comfort. Without it, the metal would dig into the skin and make every move a painful experience. And let's be honest, who wants that? Historians still debate whether knights actually wore their armor constantly in daily life, or whether they only suited up for battle, but one thing's for sure, wearing all that gear was a slow, meticulous process. The knight would need help to put everything on enter the squire. As the knight stands there, enveloped in layers of padding and gleaming metal, he's not alone. A squire, typically a young man in training, is by his side, ready to help with the heavy lifting. Imagine being the squire, nervously working with armor that's taller than you, feeling the weight of history in every piece you lift. But this wasn't just about strength, it was about precision. The knight's armor had to fit perfectly. A slight misalignment could be the difference between life and death. But underneath all this metal, the knight still needed to be comfortable. If the knight was to be agile in battle, comfort was key. So let's talk about the layers beneath the armor, the often overlooked but crucial base of their outfit. First, there was the padded gambeson worn under the metal suit. It was essentially a quilted jacket filled with layers of wool or linen. Not only did it absorb the impact of strikes, but it also provided warmth in cold weather and prevented chafing. A well-fitted gambeson could be the difference between a knight with full range of motion and one struggling to swing his sword effectively. Over time, the gambeson became more sophisticated. Knights could add more layers or reinforce the garment with tougher materials, but the general idea was always the same: create a comfortable and supportive base layer. This base garment, along with the chainmail coif, a hood of metal rings, protected the knight from blunt force trauma, and to a lesser extent from edged weapons. Chainmail wasn't perfect, it didn't stop arrows or sword slashes completely, but it reduced the damage, especially when paired with the padded layers beneath. Historians argue over just how much protection knights truly got from their armor. Some say it was the perfect defense, while others claim that no amount of metal could fully protect them from certain weapons like the crossbow, which could pierce even the toughest of armor. Either way, one thing's for sure, the layers of protection weren't just practical, they were a point of pride. A knight in his full armor looked like a walking fortress, but it took a lot of effort to look that intimidating. Now, as the knight finishes suiting up, he'll take a final look at his helm. The helmet wasn't just about safety, it was also a symbol. A knight's helmet could be quite ornate, often designed to showcase his personal crest family emblem or some other distinguishing feature. The helmet was more than just a piece of armor, it was a statement of identity. Historians still debate whether knights actually wore their full helmets during all combat situations. Some argue that knights preferred to wear less cumbersome headgear in battle, such as open-faced visors, because they offered better visibility. Others claim that the full helm style was symbolic and used only for ceremonial purposes. Whichever the case, the helmet played a significant role in a knight's identity, and it's impossible to overstate just how much effort went into crafting it. As you imagine yourself now fully armored, the next crucial step is the helm, perhaps the most iconic piece of a knight's battle gear. This isn't just about covering the head, it's about protection and, more importantly, intimidation. A knight's helmet was often designed with sharp angles and sometimes even facial slits that exaggerated the wearer's features, giving them a fiercer appearance. A knight was not just a soldier, he was a symbol of power. And the helm was his crown, showcasing his rank, his family's crest, and his own personal style. The construction of the helmet was as meticulous as the rest of the armor. It could be made of solid iron or steel, and it had to fit perfectly. Any gap, no matter how small, could spell disaster. But it wasn't just about the metal, it was also about the visor. The visor could be adjusted depending on the knight's needs. Some helmets featured a full faceplate with tiny slits for breathing, others had a more open design, with just enough coverage to offer protection while allowing the knight to see and move more freely. These choices were critical, especially during battle when visibility was a key factor. But despite all the layers of protection, helmets had one flaw: visibility. Historians still argue whether the lack of clear sight through a full faceplate made it difficult for knights to engage in battle. After all, the field was chaotic, filled with dust debris and the loud noise of clashing swords and battle cries. The limited visibility from a full helmet made fighting in such conditions even more challenging. It's said that knights often had to rely heavily on their squires to guide them or even follow the rhythm of the battle to know when and where to strike. Now picture this. You're ready. Your armor is on your helmet securely fastened, and it's time to choose your weapon. But how does a knight pick from the myriad of deadly tools at his disposal? The decision wasn't as simple as grabbing whatever sword was closest. The weapon had to be suited to the knight's fighting style, the type of battle, and even his own personal strength. Swords, maces, spears, and lances were all part of the knight's arsenal, each designed for specific purposes. The sword is perhaps the most iconic weapon associated with knights. Light, fast, and razor-sharp, the sword was ideal for close combat. But it wasn't always the weapon of choice. The lance, for example, was the go-to for knights on horseback. The long reach of the lance allowed knights to charge into battle and strike from a distance, making it perfect for the initial assault. Once the charge ended and the battle moved into hand-to-hand combat, knights would often switch to a sword or a mace. Historians still argue which weapon was most effective in battle. Some believe the sword was the true knight's weapon, a symbol of his skill and artistry in combat, while others argue that the lance with its greater reach and power was the true hero of the medieval battlefield. Whatever the choice, a knight's weapon was more than just a tool, it was an extension of his very identity. The sword in particular was often engraved with family crests, religious symbols, or personal mottos, and it could be handed down from father to son, somewhat carrying centuries of history with it. With the helmet to fasten the armor in place and the weapon of choice clutched firmly in hand, the knight is now prepared to face the battle. But there's more to this preparation than just donning metal and picking up a sword. The shield, often overlooked in favor of more glamorous weapons, played a significant role in a knight's arsenal. It wasn't just for defense, it was also a symbol of honor and a sign of his standing among his peers. The knight's shield came in various shapes and sizes, but the most common form was the kite-shaped shield. This long curved piece of metal or wood, reinforced with a metal rim, covered the knight's body from shoulder to knee. It wasn't just about protecting the knight from blows. The shield could also be used as a weapon in itself. Knights were trained to deflect strikes with their shields, using the metal edge to bash opponents or to knock them off balance. In fact, the shield was often the first line of defense in any battle. It provided a solid barrier between the knight and the enemy's sword or spear, giving the knight a moment to assess the situation and prepare his next move. But the shield wasn't just a physical defense, it was also a symbol of the knight's family rank and honor. Often the shield would be emblazoned with the knight's family crest or coat of arms, making it instantly recognizable to allies and foes alike. In a battle where thousands of knights could be engaged, the shield allowed the knight to maintain his identity. This was particularly important in the chaotic, noisy environment of medieval warfare, where soldiers could easily lose track of who was on their side. A knight's shield, however, stood out, offering a kind of personal branding in the midst of the madness. Historians still debate how much the shield's design influenced the effectiveness of a knight in battle. Some argue that a more ornate shield with its additional weight and size could hinder movement, while others believe it provided more protection and intimidation. Regardless, knights took great pride in their shields. It was an essential part of their identity and their combat strategy. After all, a knight's shield was more than just a tool. It was an integral part of his entire persona. As the knight finishes adjusting his shield, he now faces the mental aspect of battle preparation. It's one thing to be physically ready, but a knight's true strength lies in his mental resolve. Before heading into battle, knights would often engage in prayers, blessings, and superstitions to ensure their safety. For many, it was a matter of spiritual preparation. Knights would attend Mass, seeking divine favor in the upcoming battle. In addition to these religious practices, many knights would also follow superstitious rituals. Some would carry good luck charms, while others would touch the swords of fallen knights in the hope that it would bring them strength. Historians still argue about how much religion truly influenced the knight's combat readiness. Some believe the religious aspect of a knight's life was a central part of his identity, while others argue that knights were more likely to rely on practical experience and battle tactics to win the day. Whatever the case, it's clear that knights took their mental preparation seriously. Whether it was invoking the favor of God or relying on personal rituals, the knight knew that the battle wasn't just fought on the physical battlefield, it was also fought in the mind. Now with his armor gleaming in the morning light, his weapon ready, and his shield securely strapped to his arm, the knight is mentally prepared to face the battle ahead. But there's one last step in the preparation: the squire. This young, eager assistant may not wear armor, but his role is crucial. While the knight may look imposing in his full armor, it's the squire who makes sure everything runs smoothly. He assists with the heavy armor, adjusts the gear, and makes sure the knight is as comfortable as possible before the chaos of the battlefield begins. Picture this: the squire is bustling around, checking straps, tightening buckles, and making sure nothing is loose. The knight is calm, steely-eyed, perhaps murmuring a prayer or two. The relationship between the knight and the squire is a complicated one that carries great significance in the medieval world. While the knight is the warrior, the squire is the apprentice, learning the ropes, gaining first-hand experience in battle preparation, and one day aspiring to wear armor himself. The role of the squire wasn't just about helping the knight get dressed, it was also about being the knight's personal assistant on the battlefield. From holding the knight's horse during battle to running errands or even passing weapons in the heat of combat, the squire was an essential part of the knight's team. Some historians believe that this relationship is what set medieval knighthood apart from other military systems. While other warriors may have fought alone or with lesser ranks, a knight always had his squire, his right-hand man. Historians still debate whether the squire's role was more ceremonial or practical. Some argue that the squire's presence was more about showing the importance of tradition, while others insist that the squire was indispensable on the battlefield. But one thing is clear: the bond between knight and squire was vital, a partnership that relied on mutual trust and respect. After all, a knight's success in battle often depended on how well his squire supported him. As the preparations near completion, the knight takes a deep breath and surveys the battlefield. The day is finally here. The clanking of swords, the low hum of the horse's hooves, everything seems to come to life. The knights will soon ride into battle, and the time for strategizing is nearly over. But there's one final piece of the puzzle: battle formations. The knight can't just ride off on his own and hope for the best. The battle plan must be followed. This is where the art of battle stances comes into play. Knights were trained in different formations to maximize their effectiveness during combat. One of the most famous formations was the shield wall, where knights stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields creating an unbreakable barrier. The weight of the armor and the force of the knight's charge would push forward like an unstoppable wave. The shield wall was effective for repelling cavalry charges and holding the line, but it also required perfect coordination. Any weak link in the formation could lead to disaster. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these formations. Some argue that they were nearly invincible, while others claim that a well-timed cavalry charge could break the formation apart. But one thing is certain: the training that knights underwent to master these formations was intense. From early childhood, they were drilled on the importance of teamwork, positioning, and the value of discipline in the chaos of battle. Now imagine you're a knight standing at the edge of your shield wall, surrounded by your comrades. You're ready. But what comes next? As the knight stands firm, shield in place, helmet secured, and sword ready, the sounds of the battlefield begin to fill the air. The noise is deafening: the pounding hooves of horses, the clash of metal, the cries of men charging into the fray. It's a cacophony of chaos, and yet the knight remains resolute. In this moment, all the preparation, all the training comes down to this. But how did a knight manage to stay composed in such an environment? It wasn't just about physical preparation. Mental readiness was just as important. The knight had to focus, tuning out the chaos around him and honing in on the task at hand. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for honor. A fight to uphold his code of chivalry. For the knight, this was more than a mere job. It was a way of life, a commitment to something greater than himself. And this sense of purpose was essential, especially when the battle began in earnest. As the battle begins, knights on horseback charge into the enemy lines, their lances pointed forward, poised to strike. The sheer force of the charge is overwhelming. A knight on horseback clad in heavy armor could deliver devastating blows with his lance, knocking over opponents off their feet with the force of the impact. But charging into battle wasn't without risks. The knight's horse was just as vulnerable as the knight himself, and if the horse was struck, the knight would be thrown off and left at the mercy of the enemy. This made the relationship between knight and horse incredibly important. Historians still argue over the role of the horse in medieval warfare. Some claim that the knight's success depended largely on the quality of his steed, while others suggest that the knight's skill and experience were far more important than the horse. Either way, the bond between knight and horse was crucial, and it's said that knights often spent as much time training their horses as they did preparing themselves. The horse wasn't just a mode of transportation, it was a warrior in its own right, and the knight relied on it just as much as he relied on his own armor and weaponry. But once the initial charge subsides and the battle moves into close combat, knights would switch to their swords, axes, or maces. The weight of the sword, the grip of the hilt, and the speed of the strikes became the knight's focus as he fought hand to hand. This part of the battle was brutal. Knights had to be skilled, and not only in swordplay, but also in using their shield to deflect blows and create openings for strikes. It was a deadly dance of offense and defense, and it took years of practice to master. Historians often debate how knights were trained in these combat styles. Some suggest that knights practiced with wooden swords and shields during their training, while others believe they used blunt-edged real swords, which allowed them to hone their skills without causing too much harm. Either way, the preparation was intense. A knight wasn't just a warrior, he was an expert in multiple forms of combat, ready to face whatever came his way on the battlefield. As the battle rages on, the knight must continue to adapt. His body aches from the weight of the armor, his muscles burn from swinging the sword, and his mind races to stay focused amid the chaos. But with each swing, with each movement, the knight's training kicks in. It's not just about surviving, it's about performing his duty to the highest standard. For the knight, there's no room for fear or hesitation. He must remain steadfast, ready to fight until the very end. Historians still debate how the knight's sense of duty and honor affected their performance in battle. Some believe that knights fought harder because they were bound by their code of chivalry, while others argue that their sense of honor could be a burden distracting them in the heat of battle. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear: the knight's commitment to his cause was a defining characteristic, and it drove him to fight with everything he had. As the clash continues, the knight knows that his success in battle depends not just on his physical prowess, but on his ability to stay focused, calm, and mentally sharp. This mental toughness was a key element in the preparation for battle, and it would ultimately determine the knight's fate. Will he emerge victorious, or will the chaos of the battlefield swallow him whole? The battle unfolds around you like a storm clashing swords, the neighing of horses, the shouted commands of commanders. Amidst the chaos, you feel the weight of your armor and the adrenaline coursing through your veins. But in the heart of it all, there's a peculiar moment of clarity. The training kicks in, and despite the pandemonium, your body moves on autopilot. The rhythm of battle becomes second nature. Raise the shield, swing the sword, step to the side. It's a dance of survival. And in this moment, the knight must remain calm. Calm in the face of death, calm in the face of pain, and calm in the face of fear. But how does a knight maintain this composure when surrounded by such overwhelming carnage? Well, much of it comes from mental conditioning. Knights were not only trained to be physically resilient, but also to withstand the psychological toll of war. Before the battle even began, the knight engaged in rituals that prepared his mind as much as his body. These rituals included prayers, blessings, and sometimes even superstitions. The belief in divine protection was strong, and many knights would pray for guidance and strength, seeking favor from God or their patron saints. It wasn't uncommon for knights to carry religious artifacts or charms for good luck, believing that these would protect them in battle. The act of invoking divine protection helped to calm the nerves and focus the mind on the task ahead. It was not just physical readiness that mattered, it was spiritual and mental preparation too. Historians continue to debate how much of a knight's success in battle could be attributed to their faith versus their military training. Some argue that knights were deeply driven by their religious beliefs, viewing their battles as a form of divine mission, while others suggest that their combat skills and tactical training were far more important. Either way, the rituals and prayers provided a much-needed mental anchor during the chaos of war. The knight could rely on his faith to steady his mind, much like a warrior grounding himself before the storm of battle. As the battle presses on, knights often find themselves in the thick of hand-to-hand combat, swinging their weapons with precision and force. This part of the battle is where the true test of skill and endurance comes in. For knights, the fight was more than just about striking down the enemy. It was about controlling the fight, managing fatigue, and surviving the intense physical toll. They were taught to keep their movements economical and deliberate, not wasting energy on unnecessary swings. Every motion counted. But despite the training, fatigue was inevitable. The weight of the armor, the heat of the battle, and the pain from injuries would all take their toll. In the middle of this intense combat, the knight would also have to worry about the chaos around him. It wasn't just the enemy he had to watch out for, it was his own comrades as well. In the melee, knights could easily become disoriented, losing track of friend from foe. This is where the knight's training and formation and teamwork came into play. The shield wall mentioned earlier was designed to keep the group unified and prevent anyone from getting separated. It also allowed the knights to provide mutual support. If one knight was struck, his comrade could step in to protect him, ensuring the integrity of the unit. This sense of camaraderie was vital for survival. But no matter how strong the knight's preparation was, no amount of armor or training could protect him from the unpredictable nature of war. The battlefield was full of surprises, and the outcome of any battle could hinge on a single moment of fate. One misstep, one poorly timed swing could change everything. Historians still debate how knights dealt with the psychological impact of this uncertainty. Some believe that knights had an uncanny ability to push through their fears, focusing only on the mission at hand, while others argue that they carried the weight of uncertainty with them, unsure of how the battle would unfold. What is clear, however, is that mental resilience was just as important as physical strength. A knight who could remain focused in the midst of chaos would have the upper hand, while one who lost control would be doomed. As the battle rages on, each knight must rely on everything he's learned, his training, his faith, and his mental toughness. But even with all of this, the outcome of the battle is never certain. Victory is hard-earned and defeat is just as possible. And yet knights continue to fight, driven by their code of honor, their desire for glory, and the belief that their role on the battlefield is more than just a job, it's a calling. As the battle grinds on, the knight can feel the intensity building. The first wave of the charge has subsided, and now the battlefield is a chaotic blur. His body aches from the weight of the armor, the constant movement, the clang of metal against metal, and the adrenaline pumping through his veins. But even in the midst of this, there's a method to the madness. The knight's role is not just about swinging his sword and charging headfirst into battle. It's about using strategy and position to his advantage. This is where the knight's years of training and battle experience come into play. While some soldiers would charge into battle with brute force and abandon, the knight was taught to think strategically. Every step, every move was calculated. The knight's success wasn't just about physical strength, it was about reading the battlefield, anticipating the enemy's moves, and positioning himself for the best outcome. One of the most important tactics employed by knights was the formation. As we've already seen, the shield wall was the backbone of knightly combat. When knights stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields forming a barrier of steel, they became nearly impenetrable. This formation allowed them to push forward with brute force, while remaining protected from enemy attacks. But the shield wall wasn't the only strategy knights used. In fact, there were several formations and tactics designed to adapt to the changing tides of battle. For example, knights were often trained to fight in smaller, more flexible units called melee. These groups could break away from the shield wall to engage in more mobile and fluid combat. A knight in a melee would focus on taking out individual opponents using his speed and agility to gain an advantage. However, the melee required impeccable coordination. Knights had to work together seamlessly, supporting one another and covering each other's backs. This tactic was particularly useful when facing enemies with lighter armor or those who were not as disciplined in their formations. Historians continue to debate the effectiveness of these strategies. Some argue that the shield wall was invincible, and that knights were most successful when using this rigid formation. Others claim that the fluidity of the melee was essential for dealing with smaller, more agile forces. What is clear, however, is that knights were not simply charging into battle without thought. Their training allowed them to adapt to different situations and adjust their tactics accordingly. In addition to formations, the knight's ability to read the battlefield was crucial. A knight wasn't just reacting to his immediate surroundings, he was thinking several steps ahead. He would constantly assess the situation, adjusting his strategy based on the changing conditions. For example, if the enemy cavalry was charging, the knight might retreat to a more defensive position, allowing the shield wall to form once more. On the other hand, if the enemy's defenses were weak, the knight might lead a charge capitalizing on the opening. The ability to read the battlefield also meant that knights had to be aware of the psychological aspect of war. They had to understand how their actions would affect both their own soldiers and the enemy. A successful knight knew how to inspire his men with his leadership and bravery, while also instilling fear in the enemy. The presence of a knight on the battlefield was a psychological weapon in itself. His armor, his shield, and his banner were all symbols of power, and knights understood the importance of maintaining their composure in the face of battle. Historians still debate whether this psychological impact was truly a weapon in medieval warfare, or if it was merely a product of romanticized notions of knighthood. Some scholars believe that knight's presence alone was enough to intimidate enemies, while others argue that it was the knight's combat skill that made him formidable. Regardless, the knight's psychological edge cannot be ignored. His understanding of the battlefield was not just about physical tactics, it was about maintaining control over the situation and influencing the minds of his enemies. As the battle reaches its peak, the knight remains focused, still adhering to the strategies and tactics he's been taught. But even with all his preparation and training, the outcome of the battle is uncertain. A single misstep, an unexpected change in the battlefield could shift the tide. The knight knows that victory is not guaranteed, yet it's this very uncertainty that makes the knight's role so important. His ability to adapt, to think on his feet, and to lead his men is what separates the great knights from the ordinary soldiers. The battle rages on the knight's sword, clashing with those of his enemies, his shield raised high to block incoming blows. But as the battle's momentum shifts, the knight begins to notice the subtle change in the air. The sounds of combat, and once chaotic and deafening, start to fade into a dull roar. There's a shift in the wind, a sign that the tide of battle may be turning. The knight looks around, assessing his comrades. Some are still fighting fiercely, their swords flashing in the sunlight, while others are beginning to retreat, realizing that the battle may soon be lost. Soon be? For a knight, the moment of retreat was always one of great emotional conflict. While the knight was trained to fight to the death if necessary, he was also bound by the code of chivalry, which placed a strong emphasis on loyalty and honor. Knights were supposed to fight for the greater good for their king, for their comrades, and leaving the battlefield was not something taken lightly. But sometimes retreat was the only viable option. In these moments, the knight's training kicked in once again. The knight had to remain calm, stay focused, and make decisions that would preserve his life and the lives of those under his command. Historians often debate whether knights saw retreat as a dishonorable act. Some argue that a knight's honor could only be preserved by fighting to the bitter end, while others claim that retreat was sometimes the wisest course of action, especially if it allowed the knight to fight another day. In any case, the decision to retreat was never made lightly. The knight's internal struggle during such a moment of retreat was as much a part of his training as the physical combat. As the knight begins to fall back, the retreat becomes a carefully coordinated maneuver. The shield wall, once a tight-knit unit, begins to disband, as knights form smaller, more flexible groups covering each other as they fall back to safer positions. The retreat is not a panicked flight, but a controlled withdrawal. The knight's training has prepared him for this moment. The ability to retreat with honor and discipline is just as important as the ability to charge forward with force. This tactical retreat may save the lives of many knights, allowing them to regroup and fight another day. Meanwhile, the battlefield is still alive with the sounds of clashing swords, the calls of commanders, and the frantic movements of soldiers. But for the knight, the retreat signals a different kind of mental shift. It's no longer about winning the battle, it's about survival. This is a stark reminder that even the most prepared knight cannot control every aspect of war. No amount of armor, weaponry, or tactics can predict the outcome of every battle. There are too many variables, too many unforeseen changes in the field. The knight continues to fight as he retreats, fending off any enemy soldiers who come too close, but his mind is constantly calculating, constantly assessing. He's looking for an opportunity to regroup, to find higher ground, to create a defensible position where he and his comrades can rest, rearm, and prepare for the next phase of the war. His training has prepared him for this moment, not to panic, not to give in to fear, but to act with calm precision. Historians argue whether knights were more effective in offensive or defensive situations. Some believe that the knight was at his most powerful when charging into battle, while others suggest that knights excelled in holding strong defensive positions. Regardless of the view, the retreat reveals the versatility of the knight's training. A knight is not only a warrior but also a tactician, able to shift from offense to defense when necessary, and sometimes even to escape from a situation that could lead to certain death. As the knight reaches a more secure position, he takes a moment to breathe. His armor is heavy, his muscles sore, and his heart is pounding in his chest. But in this moment of temporary peace, he reflects on the battle, the decision made, the enemies vanquished, and the comrades lost. The battlefield may be quiet for now, but the knight knows that the war is far from over. There will be more battles ahead, more challenges to face, and more decisions to make. But for now, he is alive, and that in itself is a victory. After the chaos of retreat, the knight finds himself in a temporary lull, a brief moment of respite amidst the battle's fury. He's still armored, his sword by his side, his shield close at hand. But for the first time in what feels like hours, the knight takes a breath, deep, slow, and deliberate. The adrenaline rush that powered him through the battle is beginning to fade, and with it the fatigue begins to set in. The weight of the armor, once merely a sign of strength and protection, now feels like a heavy burden. Yet even in these quiet moments, the knight cannot afford to let his guard down. While the battlefield may have quieted for the moment, the danger is far from over. This is where the knight's resilience comes into play. The ability to recover quickly, to rest just long enough before jumping back into the fray, is what separates a seasoned warrior from a novice. The knight's training has prepared him for this. He's taught himself to fight, when tired to think, when under pressure, and to lead when others may falter. The knight scans the battlefield, watching as his fellow soldiers regroup. Some are already tending to their wounds, while others are reorganizing the formations, preparing for the next move. There's a sense of order amid the chaos, a reminder that knights, despite their individual bravery, are always part of a larger team. The bond between knights, their squires, and the other soldiers is crucial to maintaining morale, especially after a grueling retreat. Every knight understands that they are not alone. Their actions affect the entire outcome of the battle, and the success of the group depends on each individual soldier's ability to recover and continue the fight. Historians still debate the significance of camaraderie on the battlefield. Some argue that knights were lone warriors driven by personal glory and individual honor, while others emphasize the importance of unity and teamwork. Regardless of the perspective, it's clear that a knight's ability to fight as part of a larger whole was essential. The idea of chivalry wasn't just about personal conduct. It was about being part of a knightly order, one that supported and relied on each other in the most difficult of circumstances. With the brief moment of rest behind him, the knight prepares for the next phase. He checks his sword, sharpens the edge with a quick swipe, and ensures his shield is intact. There's no time for slacking, no room for complacency. He has a role to play, and it's not finished yet. He knows that the battle isn't over. There's always the possibility of one final decisive charge. The knight stands up straight, shakes off the fatigue, and moves forward with renewed determination. His training has conditioned him to never give up, to always push forward no matter the odds. The next phase of the battle could decide everything. A well-timed strike, a sudden charge, or a clever ambush could be the key to turning the tide in the knight's favor. The battlefield is a dynamic, ever-changing environment, and the knight's ability to adapt to the shifting conditions is vital. His mind works as much as his muscles, constantly calculating, constantly searching for an advantage. This is where the true test of a knight's skill lies, not in the initial charge, but in the ability to stay focused and find a way to succeed when the odds are stacked against him. It's at this point that many knights are tested to their limits. The battle has drained them physically and mentally, and the decision to continue the fight is no longer just about strategy, it's about willpower. The knight's resolve becomes his greatest weapon. History is filled with tales of knights who, against all odds, found a way to win either through sheer force of will or by cleverly exploiting an opening. The great knights weren't just the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could outlast the enemy, who could persevere through the hardships of battle. Historians argue whether this mental fortitude is what truly made knights successful. Was it their superior tactics, their better armor, or was it their unshakable resolve that carried them through the hardest of times? Perhaps it was all of these factors working together. But one thing is certain. The knight's ability to push through fatigue, fear, and uncertainty was a defining trait. A knight who could remain focused, calm, and determined in the face of such adversity was a knight who could survive and sometimes even win the battle. As the knight readies himself for what comes next, he knows that the battle is far from over. But no matter the outcome, he has already proven his worth. The true measure of a knight is not only in the victories he achieves, but in his ability to endure, adapt, and keep fighting when others may falter. The knight moves with purpose, his armor now feeling like a second skin. He knows that this battle, no matter how much longer it drags on, will come to a head soon. The chaos has settled into a kind of rhythm, the ebb and flow of combat becoming more predictable. The knight can sense it, the shift in the air, the quiet before the final storm. The moment when the battlefield will either explode into chaos again or find a sudden unexpected silence. Around him his comrades are steadying themselves. Their swords are ready, shields are polished, and they are beginning to regroup into a new formation. The enemy too is organizing, preparing for whatever may come next. This is the critical moment. The one where decisions made now could tip the balance of the entire conflict. It's no longer just about fighting. It's about strategy, leadership, and vision. The knight must be ready for anything. In the midst of this quiet, the knight reflects briefly on the reason why he fights. It's not just for glory, not just for honor, but for something more profound, something that has been ingrained in him since childhood. The knight was raised to defend, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and to uphold the values of chivalry. But even so, a knight is not immune to doubt. The thought of death, the violence, the destruction, all of it weighs on his heart. But a knight does not show fear. Instead, he stands tall, willing to make the hard choices, knowing that it is his duty to lead and fight for the greater good. Historians often debate the true motivations behind the knight's participation in battle. Were they fighting for their kings, their country, or their personal sense of honor? Some scholars argue that knights were driven primarily by their personal code of chivalry, which focused on loyalty, courage, and honor above all else. Others suggest that their involvement in battle was more about the practicalities of land, wealth, and power. Whatever the case, one thing is certain: the knight's sense of duty and loyalty to his ideals was a powerful motivator. As the time draws near, the knight knows that the battle is about to reach its peak. The final charge, the ultimate clash, is coming. There's no turning back now. The knight's mind sharpens his focus, narrowing to the task at hand. He takes a deep breath and mentally prepares himself. The exhaustion of the day, the pain of the battle, all of it is pushed aside for the moment. What matters now is the next step, what happens when the line is drawn and the final charge begins. The charge is the culmination of all the knight's preparation, all his training, and all his experience. As he raises his sword, his comrades around him do the same. The knight feels a deep sense of camaraderie, the same bond that held them together throughout the day's struggles. In that moment, it's not just about the knight fighting alone. It's about the collective strength of his fellow knights and soldiers. Each knight's actions will affect the outcome of the battle, but together they are stronger. The battlefield comes alive again with a fury, the sounds of horses galloping, swords clashing, and war cries echoing through the air. The knight's heart races, but his movements are precise and deliberate. The plan honed through years of training is now in motion. The knights charge forward, shields locked together, weapons raised. It's the moment of truth, the final test. Victory or defeat will be decided in the next few minutes. Historians continue to study the tactics and outcomes of knightly charges. Some argue that the success of the charge depended largely on the discipline and training of the knights, while others believe that it was the element of surprise or sheer force that made the difference. Regardless, the charge was the ultimate test of a knight's skill, and those who survived were often celebrated as heroes. The knight amidst the chaos remains focused, moving with the rhythm of battle, taking advantage of any opening he can find. His sword is an extension of his will, slicing through the enemy lines with precision. His shield, once a defensive tool, now serves as both protection and weapon as he bashes it into his enemies, creating openings for his comrades to strike. As the battle reaches its fever pitch, the knight knows that the outcome is still uncertain, but no matter what happens, he's given his all. His training, his faith, his resolve, they have brought him here. And no matter the result, he will stand tall, proud of what he has accomplished, and ready to face whatever comes next. The dust and smoke of battle swirl around you as the final charge unfolds. The chaos is unlike anything you've ever experienced, a frenetic mix of clashing swords, the rhythm of horses' hooves pounding the earth, and the sounds of the fallen. The knight's heart races in his chest, but his movements are still precise, honed by years of training. The weight of the armor, once cumbersome, now feels like an extension of his own body, each piece a shield against both the physical blows of battle and the mental fatigue that threatens to overwhelm him. And yet, even in the midst of the violence and mayhem, the knight remains resolute. Every swing of the sword, every shield block, every step forward is deliberate, calculated, and part of the strategy that's been drilled into him for years. There's no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. The knight knows that in this moment, the balance of the entire battle depends on him and on every other knight who stands beside him. Together they are a force to be reckoned with. As the knight charges forward, he remembers the training, the drills, the practice, the lessons learned from battle after battle. It was never just about brute force. It was about timing precision, and knowing when to strike, when to block, and when to retreat. Every movement was a decision made in the heat of the moment, but it was a decision based on years of experience and training. The knights fight with skill and discipline, pushing forward despite the odds. But as the battle reaches its peak, the tide begins to shift. The first charge has begun to break the enemy's lines, but there's no guarantee of victory. The knight knows that the fight is far from over, every battle is unpredictable, and the enemy could rally at any moment. But despite the uncertainty, the knight presses on drawing strength from his comrades and his commitment to the cause. Historians still debate the effectiveness of the final charge in medieval warfare. Some argue that it was the decisive moment of a battle, the force that could turn the tide and lead to victory. Others believe that it was often a desperate move made when a knight's forces were already stretched thin and defeat seemed imminent. Whatever the case, the final charge was always a moment of intense focus and energy, a test of endurance and resolve. In the thick of it all, the knight's mind races. He's aware of the enemy's movements, their strategies, and the gaps in their defenses. His training guides him. He knows when to strike, when to hold back, and when to support his comrades. The knight's role is not just to win the battle for himself, but to help his fellow knights achieve victory as well. This is where the unity of the knightly order comes into play. It's not about individual glory, it's about the collective strength of the unit. The knight's skill is just one part of the greater whole. As the battle continues, the knight finds himself face to face with an enemy knight equally well armored and equally determined. This is the ultimate test. The two knights lock eyes for a moment before engaging in combat, the sound of metal scraping against metal filling the air. The knight's sword strikes with precision, his shield deflecting blows. Every move is carefully calculated, every strike a test of skill, experience, and resolve. It's the kind of moment that defines a knight's legacy, a duel that could change the course of the battle or at the very least determine the knight's fate. Historians often romanticize these one-on-one duels between knights, portraying them as the epitome of knightly valor and honor. However, the reality was often less glamorous. These duels were often fought in the chaos of the battlefield amidst the noise and confusion where victory was more about survival than glory. Nevertheless, they were still significant moments in the battle, moments where a knight could demonstrate his prowess, his strength, and his commitment to his cause. As the duel rages on, the knight feels the weight of his armor, the fatigue of the long battle, and the sharpness of his focus. Every movement, every breath is calculated. He knows at this moment this fight could be the one that makes all the difference. But even as the knight faces his opponent, there's a sense of camaraderie, the knowledge that this battle is part of something much larger than himself. Victory is not just about personal triumph, it's about the honor of the knightly order, the protection of the realm, and the preservation of a way of life. Historians argue whether individual duels between knights were truly decisive in the outcome of battles. Some believe that they were so symbolic, demonstrating the knight's honor and personal skill, while others argue that battles were won or lost based on the strength of entire armies, not just the skill of individual combatants. But for the knight, the duel is still an essential part of his identity. It's a moment that tests his worth, his resolve, and his place in the ongoing struggle for honor and glory. The clashing of swords and the grunts of exertion echo all around you. The knight continues his duel, the enemy before him, just as determined, just as skilled. His movements are fluid, honed by years of training and countless skirmishes. Yet even with all his preparation, there's a nagging realization that no amount of skill can guarantee victory. This is the heart of combat, unpredictable, chaotic, and full of variables. The knight's opponent is strong, but the knight is stronger. His focus is sharp, his resolve unshaken. With a swift strike, the knight parries the enemy's sword and counters with his own. The clash of steel is deafening, and the momentum shifts in an instant. The battle is a test of stamina, and the knight feels the strain in his arms, his legs, and his chest. It's a fight not just of weapons but of endurance. The knight's years of preparation, the long hours of training, the repetitive drills, and the countless battles have all led him to this moment. His muscles may be tired, but his mind is alert, and that is what keeps him moving forward. Historians often romanticize these duels between knights, portraying them as battles of honor and skill. In reality, many of these duels were fought with a sense of grim necessity. The outcome could determine the fate of the knight, his comrades, and even the entire battle. One wrong move, one misstep could result in death. The knight knows this, but he continues driven by his sense of duty and his commitment to the chivalric code. It's at this point in the duel that the knight feels the true weight of his responsibility. It's not just about him anymore, it's about his comrades, his lord, and the very ideals he represents. He is not just fighting for himself, but for something greater than personal survival. The values of loyalty, honor, and courage are what guide him now, even as the sweat drips down his brow and his muscles scream in protest. It's these values that push him forward, urging him to strike harder, faster, and more decisively. In the midst of battle, it's easy to forget the cost of all this. The noise, the action, the adrenaline, everything comes together in a single, focused moment. But as the knight's opponent stumbles back, his sword slipping from his grasp, the knight realizes just how fragile this moment is. He's won, but at what cost? His armor is dented, his body battered, and his breath is heavy. The outcome of the duel may have been decided, but the knight knows that the war is far from over. Historians argue about the significance of such duels in the broader context of battle. Some suggest that these individual confrontations had little effect on the outcome of larger conflicts, while others believe that they were symbolic of the knight's resolve and bravery. Regardless of the historical perspective, one thing is clear for the knight. Each duel was a deeply personal experience. It wasn't just about victory, it was about proving his worth, his courage, and his commitment to his code. Now with his opponent defeated, the knight looks around him. The battlefield is changing again as the momentum shifts once more. The knights and soldiers who once stood firm in their formations now seem to be disoriented, their morale shaken. The loss of a key figure, whether it be a knight or a commander, can have a devastating effect on the outcome of the battle. And yet in the midst of the chaos, the knight knows that his fight is not yet over. There are still many battles to be fought, many more moments of uncertainty ahead. The knight steels himself. The victory may be his, but it's only one step in the long road of war. The true test of his strength lies not in this single victory, but in his ability to continue to adapt and to fight for what he believes in no matter how many battles lie ahead. His role is far from finished. He is a knight bound by duty, honor, and the code of chivalry. The war may go on, but the knight remains unwavering, ready to face whatever challenges the future holds. Historians often debate the psychological toll that war took on knights. Many argue that the constant violence, the death, and the uncertainty took a heavy toll on their minds. While knights were trained to be resilient, they were also human. The weight of their actions, the lives they took, and the comrades they lost weighed heavily on them. The knight knows this, but he pushes through, relying on the strength of his training, his sense of purpose, and his unwavering resolve. As the battle seems to slow down, the knight's gaze shifts over the battlefield. He's surrounded by the aftermath of the clash, the fallen, the wounded, the exhausted, and the triumphant. His mind races, calculating the next steps, victory or defeat. It's always bittersweet. The battlefield is a place of honor, but it's also a place of loss where each victory is paid for with the lives of comrades and enemies alike. The knight breathes in deeply, his chest heavy with fatigue, but his duty is far from finished. His role in the battle doesn't end with the defeat of a single opponent. The knight's focus shifts from personal combat to the larger picture. Now he must help organize the remaining forces, assess the casualties, and prepare for the next phase. A knight is not only a fighter, but also a leader responsible for maintaining order and morale, especially in the wake of a fierce engagement. The battlefield is still full of danger, and the knight's strategic mind kicks into high gear. Historians often talk about the knight's role as a leader in the heat of battle, emphasizing their ability to command and inspire their troops. But the reality of leadership on the battlefield wasn't always glamorous. There was no time for celebration after a victory, only more vigilance, more strategy. A knight must oversee the care of the wounded, help organize retreat if necessary, and ensure that the soldiers under his command are prepared for what's to come. This is where the true test of a knight's leadership lies, not in his skill with the sword, but in his ability to guide his comrades through the aftermath of battle. The knight now walks among his men, offering words of encouragement, helping where needed. He checks on his comrades, ensuring that their wounds are treated, that their morale is intact. Some knights will spend hours or even days caring for the wounded, treating injuries with the limited medical knowledge of the time. The knight's role as a protector and a leader extends far beyond the battlefield. He is responsible for the lives of those around him, not just on the front lines, but in the aftermath as well. Historians debate the true extent of the knight's influence on the battlefield in these moments of recovery. Was the knight more effective as a strategist, or was his true strength in the way he maintained order and cohesion in the chaos? Some scholars argue that the knight's leadership abilities were more important than his combat skills, as they were the ones who could rally their men after a crushing defeat or keep them focused during a drawn-out conflict. Others suggest that it was the knight's presence on the battlefield that kept the morale of the troops high, a symbol of strength and resolve that inspired others to keep fighting. As the knight surveys the battlefield, the weight of the situation becomes clearer. The aftermath of a battle is always more complicated than it seems. The wounded must be cared for, the dead honored, and the remaining forces regrouped. The knight must assess whether the battle is truly won or whether there's more to come. Will the enemy attempt another assault, or have they been defeated for good? And what about the consequences for the land, the people, and the realm? It's moments like these that reveal the complexity of a knight's life. On the surface, it seems as though the knight's role is simple fight, win, repeat. But in reality, the job extends far beyond combat. It's about leadership responsibility and the heavy burden of making decisions that affect the lives of everyone around you. Even after the enemy is defeated, the knight's duty continues. The knight walks away from the cast, the weight of his armor still heavy on his shoulders. The battle is over for now, but the knight knows that there will be more fights, more decisions, and more moments of uncertainty. The war is far from finished, and the knight's role in it is far from complete. His commitment to the cause, to his comrades, and to the ideals of chivalry is what keeps him moving forward. Historians still discuss the toll that constant warfare took on knights physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Some argue that knights were bound by their code of honor and duty and that they took pride in the sacrifices they made. Others believe that the constant battles, the loss of comrades, and the weight of responsibility led to a sense of weariness, a desire for peace and rest. Regardless, the knight's sense of duty never wavers. No matter the cost, he continues knowing that his role in this long, complex war is far from over. As the knight steps away from the battlefield, his gaze lingers on the chaos behind him. The fallen soldiers, the bloodied earth, the wreckage of war. The noise that once filled the air is now replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the murmurs of those still catching their breath. His mind, once consumed with the heat of combat, now begins to process the aftermath. The adrenaline is wearing off, and what remains is a gnawing exhaustion, both physical and mental. The knight's chest heaves as he looks around at the wreckage, his heart heavy with the cost of the day's conflict. But even in the midst of the aftermath, the knight knows that his work is far from done. The battle may be over, but the consequences are far-reaching. He looks to his fellow knights, his comrades in arms, who are scattered across the field, some tending to the wounded, others helping with the cleanup, and many silently reflecting on the toll that the battle has taken. This is the true test of a knight's character. It's not just about fighting, not just about winning, it's about how he handles the aftermath, how he leads his men when the excitement fades and the reality of war sets in. A knight's role is never as clear-cut as it may seem. The glamorous image of knights as invincible warriors on horseback is often overshadowed by the heavy responsibilities they carried. The true work of a knight is in the recovery, the rebuilding, and the nurturing of morale after the chaos has subsided. In this moment of quiet, the knight must lead in a different way by offering strength to his men, by showing them that even in the face of loss, they are not alone. Their duty may have been fulfilled on the battlefield, but their role is not yet over. The knight knows this instinctively. He must continue to serve not just in the heat of battle, but in the rebuilding of what was lost. Historians have often reflected on the emotional toll that battle took on knights. While they were trained to be resilient, their humanity could not be ignored. The lives lost, the comrades fallen, all weighed heavily on the knight's heart. Yet knights were often expected to move past their grief quickly and focus on the task at hand, whether it was preparing for another battle or helping to rebuild the community they had fought for. This emotional resilience, this ability to compartmentalize and push forward, is what made knights different from the average soldier. It's what allowed them to serve for years, even decades, in the face of constant warfare. As the knight takes a final look at the battlefield, he reflects on the costs of war. His armor is stained with blood, his sword dull from use, and his body is sore from the wear and tear of battle. But there's something more, a deep sense of fatigue, not just physical, but emotional. War is relentless, and the knight knows that there will always be more battles ahead, more conflicts, more pain. Yet even in the face of all this, he remains steadfast. The knight is bound by duty, by honor, and by the ideals that have been ingrained in him since he first put on his armor. He is a warrior, a leader, a symbol of strength, but above all, he is a servant to a cause greater than himself. Historians have long debated whether the knight's code of chivalry was truly a guiding force or merely a social construct. Some argue that it was the moral foundation that allowed knights to navigate the complexities of warfare with honor, while others suggest that the code was often disregarded in the heat of battle. Regardless of the historical interpretation, what is undeniable is that the knight's sense of duty, honor, and loyalty to his comrades and his cause defined his actions. Even in the face of exhaustion, loss, and doubt, The knight pushes forward, guided by the ideals that have shaped him. As the knight begins to walk away from the battlefield, his mind begins to settle. The chaos, the confusion, the rush of battle, they are all behind him now. What lies ahead is not just the immediate aftermath of war, but the long, slow journey of healing, reflection, and preparation for what comes next. The knight knows that a peace like victory is fleeting. War may never truly end, but the knight's role, his duty, remains unchanged. He will continue to fight, to serve, and to lead no matter the cost. Historians still reflect on the knight's place in the world, both as a warrior and as a symbol. Some see him as the epitome of strength. Others as a tragic figure doomed to a life of endless conflict. But the knight himself knows the truth. His purpose is not in the glory of battle, but in the unwavering commitment to a cause greater than himself. He may be weary, he may be battered, but he will continue to fight as long as his sword still holds steady in his hand.